And my role today is to provide you with some background on the activity we've seen from Hezbollah, both globally, but also here in the homeland. And I'm doing that in order to provide some context about the group's operations worldwide. And this background that I'll be discussing with you points to three recurring themes. First, Hezbollah's use of terrorism across the globe, which has persisted for several decades. Second, the group's continued effort to advance terrorism acts worldwide. And third, the fact that the organization is, in fact, focused on U.S. interests, including here in the homeland, and that is part of the reason why we are here today. Lebanese Hezbollah has repeatedly demonstrated for the world its true character. It is an organization that relies on terrorism as well as other forms of violence and coercion to achieve its goals. And this takes place in spite of the group's attempts to portray itself as a legitimate political party. And prior to September 11th, I think everybody knows, Hezbollah was responsible for the terrorism-related deaths of more U.S. citizens than any other foreign terrorist organization. Now, for many Americans, their introduction to the threat posed by this group came after Hezbollah's attack on the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in April of 1983. And that horrific attack killed 63 and wounded an additional 120 individuals. And it was followed by an even more deadly attack on our Marine barracks in October of 1983, which killed 241 Americans and wounded an additional 128 Americans. So Hezbollah's penchant for violence has not changed over the last 3 decades. We've seen time and time again with its International Terrorism Unit, the External Security Organization, also known as the IJO, the Islamic Jihad Organization, and Unit 910, that its deployment of operatives to nearly every corner of the globe continues to engage in terrorism-related activity. Now, in 2012, the group carried out a bomb attack in Bulgaria that killed 5 Israeli tourists and 1 Bulgarian national. And a number of Hezbollah operatives have been caught laying the groundwork for attacks in places like Azerbaijan, in Egypt, in Thailand, in Cyprus, and in Peru. And there are other instances of Hezbollah-related arrests and disruptions around the world that are at this point unpublicized and remain classified. But all of this together shows us that the group seeks to develop and maintain a global capability to carry out acts of terror. And I can assure you that the conversation today would be much different had some of these disruptive plots actually succeeded. Casualty counts would be higher and many innocent lives would have been forever altered. The group is also known to focus on areas populated by tourists, almost guaranteeing that with their attacks, innocent civilians will be victims. Now, with respect to the homeland here in the United States, let me say this. While much of our work in the government since 9/11 has focused on al-Qaeda and more recently on ISIS, in the 20 years since Hezbollah's designation as a foreign terrorist organization, we have never taken our focus off of Hezbollah and on the threat it represents to the homeland. And while I'm not here today to speak publicly about any specific or credible or imminent threat to the homeland, we in the intelligence community do in fact see continued activity on behalf of Hezbollah here inside the homeland. And as you would expect, as the American people would expect, we are watching very closely for additional signs of that activity here in the homeland. In June, as I'm sure most of you are aware, according to published criminal complaints, 2 individuals conducting activities on behalf of Hezbollah were arrested here inside the United States. And those arrests serve as a stark reminder of Hezbollah's global attack infrastructure, as well as the group's aspirations, potentially, to carry out attacks here in the homeland. It's our assessment that Hezbollah is determined to give itself a potential homeland option as a critical component of its terrorism playbook. And that is something that those of us in the counterterrorism community take very, very seriously. With all of the focus on ISIS and al-Qaeda, I can assure you that those of us who have focused on terrorism for the entire period since 9/11 have never taken our eye off of the Hezbollah threat. We have and will continue to monitor closely Hezbollah activity around the world and work aggressively to disrupt any instances of Hezbollah operating within our borders. I'd also like to point out that Hezbollah has not limited its use of terrorism to venues outside of Lebanon. The group, though it claims to be defenders of Lebanon, has repeatedly turned its weapons on the people of Lebanon or otherwise coerced them to advance Hezbollah's goals. There are countless examples of that I could point to include those being investigated by the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. But I'll just take a quick moment to highlight a few of the most egregious acts. In 2016, Hezbollah detonated a bomb outside the BLOM bank in Beirut. Going back to 2012, the group killed the head of Lebanon's Internal Security Forces intelligence branch. In 2008, Hezbollah took over parts of Beirut, killing at least 84 Lebanese citizens and wounding at least another 199 after the Lebanese government attempted to exercise greater oversight into the group's communications infrastructure. And of course, in 2005, it was Hezbollah operatives who assassinated former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri in a massive car bombing in downtown Beirut. In addition to all of this terrorism-related activity around the globe, Hezbollah continues to devote significant resources to expanding its conventional arsenal in Lebanon, including the procurement of advanced rocket and missile capabilities and even indigenous weapons production facilities. This has resulted in a broadening of the threat to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula regions, and it's in violation of the 1989 TAIF agreement, as well as UN Security Council resolutions 1559 and 1701, both of which call for the disarmament of all Lebanese militias. This buildup, weapons buildup by Hezbollah, has perpetuated conflict and violence across the Middle East as their operatives deploy to places like Iraq and to Yemen, where they provide weapons, tactics, and direction to Shia militant and terrorist groups. As you well know, the group has also deployed thousands of its fighters to Syria, where it has sustained approximately 2,000 casualties fighting on behalf of the Syrian regime. So as part of our continued effort to counter the threat of Hezbollah, we're going to continue to work aggressively with our foreign, U.S., state, and local partners to share information that we have that would allow us to detect and disrupt the threat that the group poses to the U.S. and our interests around the world. Now, this information sharing and intelligence cooperation will remain a critical component of our response to what Hezbollah is doing around the globe. And to close, I will just say that the intelligence community remains focused on doing whatever we can to disrupt the work of foreign terrorist organizations around the globe, and most certainly here in the homeland. And the work I've talked about today to counter Hezbollah is a very big part of that effort. And in that regard, our work related to Hezbollah is every bit as much of a priority as our work against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That aggressive intelligence and law enforcement work goes on around the globe and around the country every day.